Hello, YouTube. Just finishing up a little bit of work with arcanes here. Darn. Got me finally up to max rank with the quills after solo farming Terrorless for a long time. Also, I did not need to transfer to fill with that equipment. That was dumb of me. Anyways, I don't know, it's not going to make me re-equip that in any way. Okay, good. One thing that I have been doing this week, and that you'll see whenever we talk about the randomizer build of the day, because of course it's going to be finally back to the weekly randomizer. I had a couple Mondays I had to take off, but back to that now, I guess. And one of the things you'll definitely see on the builds is that I've been slapping on some of the various arcanes, especially the arcade energize that I got from Nora on the weekly Nightwave. I've been a long-time proponent of not buying into the arcane market just because most Warframes function perfectly well with just a fantastic mod setup and you know, your focus schools, Xenic or whatnot. The very few Warframes in the game are not functional against high-level content without, having some kind of crazy arcane setup to give them armor and health regen on top of what they already have, you know. The only, if it was up to me, I don't think that the economy for arcanes is set up very well. Most of the time, if somebody's selling you a full set that's representing 100 man-hours of work being put into farming Hydralisks and whatnot, so that kind of thing is pretty scary to me, and it's kind of near the worst end of the Warframe market, that and some of the crazy ribbons. But we're not going to really spend the whole time talking about some of the crazy things that people are investing effort into. We're going to spend time talking about, instead, Frost, and apparently the Sybaris, the twin Gremlins, and one of my Zaws that I've got set up here. Which that's a pretty good setup here, especially because, if I remember right, the sortie today is going to be an augmented armor sortie, and I think that Frost is possibly one of the better targets for your Umbral Forma. I went ahead and threw my first one onto my Valkyr instead, but Frost is definitely on my radar for being where one of my next Umbral Forma go, because as you can see here, Frost has a very effective Blind Rage build on him, and if you were to swap out into the Umbral mods, because as you can see here, Vitality, Fiber, and a giant pile of power strength are what we're looking for on our Frost builds, typically. If you were to actually swap in an Umbral Forma onto him, there is a build possible where you're using Umbral Intensify, Transient Fortitude, Power Drift, and I believe it requires then either Augur Secrets or Growing Power to hit the 250% power strength cap. And that lets you drop Blind Rage, that lets you drop Fleet Expertise, that lets you drop any kind of other duration modifying mods, and the build ends up working out a lot better, not to mention the fact that Frost ends up with massively increased stats over his normal stats. So let's go ahead and talk about these builds, why it is that I even think that Frost is a great candidate for an Umbral build, why it is that I have these three different builds set up here, since these are all differing from each other. Also, like I said, I've got Arcane Energize on, and then the other Arcane's kind of random. I've just been equipping Victory on most of my Warframes just because, hey, health regen is health regen. Why not take that, right? One of the other things that I am going to say here about this build is that Frost is a Warframe I don't use as often as he probably deserves to be used, and maybe that's just because of this being the generic use that I have in mind for him, that he does better than other Warframes, that the whole Blind Rage thing going on. But, well, let's talk about it first of all. Essentially, I want to make excuses for there being a Rejuvenation in the Aura slot. I don't feel like Rejuvenation is necessarily the best end-all, be-all Aura for Frost. Obviously, here, since we're going for a high power strength build, an Aura that definitely comes to mind is Growing Power. Swapping in a V slot in the Aura polarity, so you can slot in Growing Power, and or Steel Charge to increase the overall mod capacity of the build, if that seems to be what you need. Now, I don't feel like Corrosive Projection is necessarily a great option on Frost, and the reason for that is because of Avalanche being excellent at partially to completely negating enemy armor. So as you can see here, Avalanche on all our units hit strips away 40% of their armor as it freezes them solid before it deals its damage, which is why Frost used to be one of the go-to Draco farming frames, because back when Draco was the absolute in-game content for shoving through XP as fast as possible, and you would see people bring in builds somewhat along these lines, because you could strip away 100% of enemy armor and end up with an ability that would kill all Grineer at rank 50 or below, say, something in that range. And while, yes, it's not going to necessarily be providing that high of a nuke in the sortie, this is still a build I'm going to do. So how do you get there? Well, it's just a linear scaling on the 40% armor reduction up to 100%, and so what we're going to do is we're going to have to hit a 250 power strength. The easy way to do that is to start off with Blind Rage. As you can see here, I'm running with my Blind Rage at rank 8 rather than rank 10, which means that I can still retain a reasonable amount of power efficiency using both Streamline and Fleet Expertise. As you can see here, 145 is still pretty good. It's higher than the majority of frames would be having after having just Streamline on them, so that's something at least. It means that we've got a 55 energy Avalanche, which is not great considering Frost's energy capacity is pretty low. You can only spam 2 of them, and then you need to wait for Xeneric to tick for a couple seconds before you can spam a third. After which point you'll be completely out of energy. So that's kind of the downside of this, and it's one of the few Warframes where I feel like Blind Rage actually is justified because of how strong the 250% power strength cast is. But that does mean that we're making some concessions here, right? First of all, between Fleet Expertise and Transient Fortitude, we're down to 12% duration, so we've got to slap in a duration mod of some kind. I'm using Constitution here to also get a bit of knockdown recovery so that we don't have to worry about, well, if I don't accidentally remove the mod, so we don't have to worry about getting knocked down too much in high-level content, which is good because Frost is only moderately tanky. He's got good base stats, but he doesn't necessarily have any mechanics that help him stay alive for much longer, and that's why I wouldn't necessarily consider him to be a more than a moderately tanky caster. He's not going to be any kind of hard tank anytime soon. Now, what we're also going with here is Vitality Steel Fiber to make use of those tanky stats. The big thing about that setup is that Frost has a base armor of 300, which means that with his base health of 300 and his base shield of 525, 300 armor is equivalent to 50% damage reduction. So after the damage reduction, he actually has an effective health of 600, which is still better than the 525 shield. Which is why, for my personal preference, I think it's perfectly fine to set him up like this in terms of defensive mods. And a big upside of building around health and armor rather than building around shielding on your Frost Prime is that the Snow Globe also has an armor scaling. As you can see here, our hugely tanky Snow Globe actually gains about 4,000, a little over 4,000 max HP off of gaining armor, which is another reason why I think that the Umbral build is a great fit on him, because that makes your Snow Globe incredibly tanky, as well as giving you an outs that you don't have to be using Blind Rage Fleet Expertise to make the build work. And like I said here, there's some concessions that we're making. Again, we're dropping to 12% duration, upping that back up to 40%. That means that the freeze duration on the Avalanche is only about 3 seconds. Now, without Constitution, as you can see here, we'll just swap that in for something random. It drops to only 1 second. And a big problem with that is that the casting animation for Avalanche is over 3/4 of a second. So you don't have any time to actually make use of the enemies that are frozen, that have their armor stripped, that have red health bars and whatnot. And so that's why we're going with Constitution here. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the range on Avalanche is only 15 meters, which is kind of bad. It would be better if it was up to a greater range, which is why we're going with Stretch. Even so, that's still only a 20-meter AoE nuke. I always say that a big rule of thumb for abilities should be that regardless of the percentage of range that you're adding to them, you should try to aim for an area effect to hit about 30 meters in a radius around you, right? That will usually cause it to nuke down an entire room full of enemies. And Frost here, this build is very much on the minimal side of that. He's only hitting 20 meters. He's only hitting 2/3 of the radius, which is only about half of the actual area of effect once you do the pi r squared and whatnot. So It's definitely not optimal, but you're at least able to hit a useful radius of enemies with stretch on. Without the stretch, I find that the avalanche just is too incredibly small to be useful at all. You're not able to hit any enemies at all, which is why I'm optimizing like that. Now, the other really good option that I really wish could be slotted in here is the Icy Avalanche, where for each enemy hit, you gain what essentially amounts to a Rhino Iron Skin, right? It essentially behaves the same way, where it's a temporary coat of armor that causes you to become immune to statuses and to absorb damage on that armor rather than on your health. And I feel like that's actually a pretty important distinction there. That Icy Avalanche is an extremely strong augment that we're simply not able to use here when we're going for the 250% strength. Now, Icy Avalanche is the setup here for this build here, where I'm going with a more balanced setup. We're going with Continuity, Constitution, Stretch for a bit more range. And actually, if I was to rethink this a little bit, I think I want to go ahead and set it up like so, with a bit more range that we can freeze larger crowds of enemies and make sure that this is hitting as many as possible. The other potential setup, I guess, would be to drop the strength a bit. There's some fiddliness, obviously, that can go into here, right? But a big reason why I was noting that the Constitution is not so necessary in that scenario is because this would give you knockdown resistance, right? Yeah, as long as you have the Icy Avalanche coating, it lets you go ahead and become immune to crowd control, which is why this is the way the build is being set up. And another potential location that I could look for here, I suppose, that would be something along the lines of Streamline plus Rage, because we're still setting up with the Rejuvenation. A big problem there is just that when you have the Avalanche, obviously, you're not having damage being dealt to your hit points. So we're going to go ahead and leave this the way it is. I think I had about the optimal way to set that up, but point being, if you're looking to play Frost as a tank, Icy Avalanche is a great resource that you should be playing around. And one of the reasons why I feel like the setup with the Umbral mods is potentially stronger than the setup with Blind Rage is simply because it gives you enough mod slots that you can slot in Stretch and still have one extra slot left over for Icy Avalanche, so you can make yourself very tanky. Very good against high level content. Now, what else can you do with Frost? Well, Frost has a lot of potential crowd control. His Freeze freezes enemies solid. His Ice Wave slows enemies and freezes them. His Avalanche freezes enemies solid, and his Snow Globe slows enemies down that are in the globe, and of course, it's also the area in a control spell. But a big thing that you can also do with Frost is, again, you can set him up with massive quantities of power or range, because of, his abilities having somewhat low base range, but when you actually add lots of power range to them, you can get some massive results. In particular, Ice Wave skills in both length and angle as you increase your power range, which is why this can be a pretty crazy build if you're going for Ice Wave impedance here. So this is the overextended caster crowd control kind of build I've got set up here. We're going with high efficiency to spam Ice Wave, and we're going with high power range there. As you can see, we don't have Constitution, so Handspring for the knockdown recovery, and Intensify just to gain back a little bit of the reduced power strength off of the overextended here. Now, obviously, this build is going to have some weaknesses, namely we're not going to be able to use it to strip armor very well like the other two builds are, but still pretty reasonable. So that's the Frost. That's what we're going to be working with. Now, I will also say this, Frost synergizes very well with crit weapons due to his ability to strip all armor off of enemies that have armored targets, namely those being some of the best enemies in the game to be proccing Corrosive and Slash and those kinds of statuses on, which is why I'm happy that we got crit weapons here. So, long discussion, I know, but we're hitting up the home track here. So the Sybaris Prime, as you can see, I don't have a ribbon or anything on this. I just really like the Sybaris Prime. It's got high critical stats, as you can see here. We're sitting on 75% crit chance, and with a good multiplier, I believe that's 30% base. Yep, 30% base and a pretty high base multiplier. There's 30% 2 times. Not bad at all, not bad. And we're also sitting on high status chance with a reasonable distribution of IPS. It's mixed, but that does mean that we're going to proc all 3 different types of status pretty frequently, including Slash. So we're going to set it up with we're going to set up with Serration, Split Chamber, Damage, Multi-Shot, that's usual. The 3 crit mods that I pulled off there. 2 dual stats to set up into Corrosive, and then it came with a dash polarity, so I've got that set up with Vigilante Armaments. Other good options there, obviously, you could be going with, what's his face, Prime Cryorens. I always find that Prime Cryorens is also good on this sort of weapon to up your raw damage output. Also, Amalgam Serration, because why not? Might as well gain a bit of extra move speed in exchange for about what am I losing there? About 20 to 30 total damage out of 1,000. Oh well. The amount of extra run speed is definitely worth the downgrade there. Other good options, obviously, this is also a potential candidate for Hunter Munitions. If you go ahead and polarize out that slot, this is also a great candidate for Hunter Munitions. Just because of the 75% crit chance. I find that it doesn't necessarily struggle that hard against armored targets, and it's not going to in this next mission at all because of Frost, so not worried there. Anyways, ignoring that, moving on. I do have a Riven on my Gremlins. This is multi-shot critical chance, which is pretty strong. Gremlins have a very high road disposition and very good base stats. As you can see here, they're essentially an upgrade to the Axe Stilettos in terms of their raw potential damage output. Critical stats, roughly the 20% 2 times minimum that you usually see people running hard crit builds on. You can also, that's a good rule of thumb, is that if the weapon's sitting at 20% 2 times crit, you should definitely think towards a critical build. If it's sitting at 15% 2 times, then okay, you might want to think about making it a hybrid build of some kind, maybe have some crit stats, maybe not, depending on how the build functions. In this case, we have a very high fire rate, which means that we're able to proc lots of status effects, so we're not necessarily worried about optimizing for status as much as we would be if we were trying to, set up for a status build. But it doesn't matter, because with the high fire rate, we can definitely go for crit here. And with the high critical stats, rather. And we still have lots of status chance because of all the multi-shot that this build has. As you can see here, we have a bunch of multi-shot, bunch of multi-shot, bunch of multi-shot. Critical dual stats, not critical, corrosive, sorry, dual stats. And we have Hornet Strike, so there we go. Finally, I sure as hell hope I've been recording this whole time. Okay, good, I have been recording this whole time. I've been talking for however long and haven't actually checked to make sure I was. Finally, we have the Khopesh, which, as I'm noted here, is essentially an upgraded version of the Tombow. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and slap some random arcane in this, because there's no downside to doing so, now that these suckers are built up. So now what we got here, that's just picked at random out of the ones that I had on hand. I bought a bunch of the infested arcanes while they were on sale, while they were being available on the very first instance of the giant infested boil, whatever that event was called, I forget. Essentially, though, let me quick point out to you what this weapon is. I feel like this isn't optimized particularly well. There's a change I would make, which is that I would still leave this as an Iguana 2, but I would swap the Ruhan grip out for a Jai grip, which will give the weapon less base damage but more attack speed. And I feel like that's a bit of an upgrade that you could and should make to any kind of Cyath status weapon when you're going to make it. So the resulting stats we got here are very low critical chance, 10%, and it was 0 before the gilding. But we've got very, very high status chance. Reasonable moderate attack speed. Again, I would think that you go for a higher attack speed and a bit lower raw damage output per attack. And that's just going to... Ultimately, it doesn't affect the weapon's raw DPS that much until you consider that it will... When the enemies get hit multiple times with the weapon, they're going to have more status effects procced on them, which is going to stack conditional overload faster. Now, obviously, primarily here, we've got Buzzkill, and we've got the 2 dual stats to set up fire rolls. So we're going for slash fire roll here as our 2 main status types. We're going to stack for condition overload. That's pretty good, because that means that we're going to be dealing finisher damage to the enemies, reducing their max health so the finisher damage kills them faster. Also, we got drifting contact, because combo multipliers affect how much your slash damage ticks for. And finally, because this is a polearm, we're able to use not only pressure point and fury, but also reach to make sure that this hits huge swaths of enemies. Swaths of enemies? How do you pronounce that? Swaths of enemies rather than just one at a time. The ultimate result here is that we've got, again, a weapon whose stats roughly mirror the Tonbo. Very high status, very high percentage of slash. The Cyath does have a little bit more impact percentage on it than the Tonbo does, but it's still a very strong weapon. This will kill things in a hurry, and if this is one of my good fallback weapons. The other, I feel like the Cyath polearm, and if I can find the other one, what's the other one? The Plague Kripath polearm. Here, as you can see, I got this set up with Ekwana Jai. The other one was Ekwana 2 Jai. This is Ekwana Jai 2. But I feel like that kind of niche is right where you want your Zaz to be sitting. These particular Zaz are some of the most powerful I have ever used, and they're very, very fun and good. Very strong weapons. Anyways, Xeneric, because of course, Xeneric. We've got to be spamming ult, so Xeneric. And finally, I've also got Worm here. It looks like it's what I've rolled for my Sentinel. I think Worm is very highly underrated and very underutilized. Extremely strong Sentinel. And you know why? Negate. I don't give a damn about crowd dispersion. I don't give a damn about having massive shields. Okay, you give it a bunch of shield capacity, whatever. Negate is incredibly good. Every 5 seconds, Negate will prevent you from being knocked down. Every 5 seconds, Negate will prevent you from being hit with a slash proc. Negate is excellent at countering things like radiation sorties, or at countering things like magnetic waves coming off of Eidolons, or even at countering the magnetic waves coming off of the Orb Mothers, things like that. It'll also prevent a lot of the slows that are inflicted by the Exploiter Orb. You know, Negate alone makes this Sentinel worth bringing into a lot of the high-level content in Warframe. And it's one of the reasons why I feel like Worm Prime is underrated. It's a Sentinel that is not great, but is tanky enough to deal with high-level content if you got your Vitality, your Redirection, your Regen. And there's so many scenarios where having Negate essentially stands in for your Warframe not being tanky enough to deal with things. As you can see here, you know, we don't necessarily have good knockdown resistance, but we don't have huge stats to work with. Negate is going to prevent us from being hit with any nasty status effects that will end us in a hurry. For example, getting knocked down and getting focused by enemies, while we're not able to kite. That once every 5 seconds, the Sentinel stands in for not having Handspring. So good. Anyways, rest of the stuff, Crowd Dispersion, Sacrifice, Vacuum, Animal Instinct. Deprived Animal Instinct, I'll point out, that just got released in the past couple weeks. This mod is super OP, almost 30 meters of enemy radar, so anything that's within the radar, or anything that we can nuke, we can also see. And, you know, normal stuff. Let's get going. I've been spending forever talking about Frost. Woo! Onto this sucker. We got a Plains Eidolon versus Augmented Armor, I think. Yeah, Augmented Armor. Plains Eidolon aren't really ideal for Frost, because he's going to be fighting a lot of enemies at ranges that are outside of what his abilities can handle. I do feel like the Plains of Eidolon, the 30-meter rule does kind of apply in force, and maybe even then some, where you need more than 30 meters in a lot of cases to be able to get to a lot of the enemies that you're looking for. But it's okay, because a big part of Plains of Eidolon sorties that I find is that they're a lot faster than you want to think they are. Oh, these suckers. Thankfully, we're able to delete those Dargons in a single tick of the Sybaris, so hopefully that stopped that fellow from mounting. No, it didn't. Where is he? There we go. I hear that sucker underneath there. This is, of course, not a very entertaining section to talk about, but I guess I can go and quick demo the effects here. As you can see there, not only did the ults, well, almost kill him. It killed him and it almost killed his drone, but it also turned their health bars red. And that's the power of the 250 power strength Frost. Yes, it doesn't freeze him for very long. You're sacrificing a lot of his potential crow control, which is considerable, but you're gaining the ability to answer a lot of these problems. Also, I found out the other day that you can actually shoot specifically these turrets. Unfortunately, the bonus armor applies to these suckers too, so... And one thing I will say about the Sybaris is that it does require the slash to hit before it's going to very effectively deal with armored targets. This weapon with being mixed APS, oh god, somebody's murdering me. Being mixed APS, it does struggle a little bit against armored targets. It's got good fire rate for proccing statuses, being a burst weapon rather than just a single semi-auto. I do feel like the Gremlins are going to be better for shredding armored targets, but it's kind of irrelevant because the Sybaris bursts hard. And we have Frost strip armor for us, so sure. It's just that you can't necessarily strip the armor off of those dropships. Don't shatter that there. I really was just worried about my health there for a second, but... yeah. Also have that very new Operator Arcane that I just got hold of. Not a new one, it's just Elevate, you know. I'm using that in place of Life Strike to do a lot of my lifesteal now. I actually took Life Strike off of all of my melee builds, so there's that. The Magus Elevate is very strong arcane, and I'm super happy that I've gotten a hold of the set finally. Or at least I'm getting a hold of the set myself. I do like it better than Life Strike because it does mean that you can actually devote the final 8th slot of melee to having damage, as opposed to just having it be a utility slot. And I use on the Life Strike. You know, and the 8th slot can be kind of important, especially if you're trying to do any kind of hybrid build that's going to have both Blood Rush and Condition Overload. You'll find that that 8th slot is super valuable. Also, ow! Let's see if I can kill a couple of these enemies real quick while they have no armor on them. That's kind of the important bit of the one duration mod. You definitely don't want to drop too much below full duration on this. Because, as you see there, they're staying frozen for a couple of seconds. If you don't have that little bit of extra duration on your build, they will only stay frozen for about the duration of the casting animation. And if the ability doesn't kill them, they don't die. I'm kind of just spamming these snow globes out. It's blocking some of my fire, but that's okay. Because we are... oh, someone sent me a message. It's blocking a little bit of my fire, but that's okay because it's also blocking most of my enemies that kill my fire. And that's more important when there's that gunship sitting overhead that's going to be very difficult for us to kill. Again, I can probably take it down with the Gremlins. And to be fair, I should probably pull out the Gremlins here real quick. As you can see, those also do an excellent job of shredding armor targets. Not as much raw burst damage, but we're okay in the long run. These suckers are very, very powerful, and again, I also have a very strong ribbon on them, so take it with a grain of salt that at base they're not going to be quite this powerful, but still, you know, it's a generic ribbon mod. Even without that, the fact that, even with that in consideration, the fact that Lucky is able to put this out with kind of damage is so impressive. Okay. As you can see there too, this nuke is hitting for massive quantities of damage with the armor reduction. You know, that's, yeah, it's 10k ability damage or something like that, but it's also 10k against unarmored Grenier, which are some of the squishiest enemies in the game once they don't have armor on them. Oh hey, you seem to think that you get to have the snow globe. I think you are wrong there, sir. Let's get rid of this mortar turret. I'll go ahead and... this has been a really long episode already, so I guess I might as well go ahead and do the third section. Why not? Why not do the third portion of it? The first one was pretty pointless. I will also say this, the Plains of Eidolon Remastered is beautiful. Look at all those trees. Look at all of the... I've even been noticing that the Plains performs better. Like, I'm getting 120 frames just about everywhere. 90 or more, even in heavy firefights. You know, I think it's because of all the trees they are adding. Actually, yeah, it looks like they're adding more units, but they actually are also occluding the atmosphere a bit better. Big thing I'm trying to do here, again, you can see that negate just every few seconds. Just provides the little bit of extra to say. Negate just provides that little bit of extra value where it blocks a slash proc, where it blocks a knockdown, or blocks it blocks even a puncture. You know, I don't particularly care about puncture, but hey, it blocks something. You know, negate. Very rarely are you taking fire when negate it isn't going on cooldown repeatedly. Go ahead and smash those guys, because I'm not really interested in necessarily moving that far away from the vault. Just want to slow them down, make it so they don't get to the vault as fast. So I'm having to run through all those snow globes anyway, so it's fine. More bombards are going to go down a lot faster if we quick take off their armor. And again, I feel like this was actually kind of an interesting setup. I've been setting up a lot of Warframes with builds that have the bit of extra utility to deal with armor targets, you know. Yeah, that works on Nyx, that works on Banshee, that works on Ash. That sort of thing it's a case where if you have the utilities to have that tool on hand, it's never a bad thing. But even in things like Corpus missions, you know, it'll help against the Bursas, it'll help against some of the new stuff out on the Planet's Eidolon, Oxyam Ospreys, etc. Just having one tool available to occasionally deal with that is nice. But in this case, since it's an augmented armor story, yeah, percentage armor shred is incredibly powerful in this scenario. Also, I got slash proc twice, so ow. Well, the worm kind of... I'm not sure what the worm did there, but it wasn't good. There we go! That's it! Well, hope you enjoyed the weekly randomizer and the weekly rants. I'm gonna kind of... I'm thinking about kind of altering this format where I might just have this be, instead of a true randomizer, more of an opportunity to have a scripted talk about how I play various Warframes. If you have a particular Warframe you want me to actually just go over and talk about in depth, let me know in the comments below. That's going to be it for the week. Herbertster, out.